Hello, everybody. It's Friday. It's the Gin and Tonic Show. It is 8 p.m. UK time, and here we go again. No Muslim bashing, no attacking, no nothing. This is the Gin and Tonic Show, where we go, to a little bit of a greater depth in analyzing Islam. What we're doing this month is looking at apologetics, and as we usually do, is we take different perspectives and we do different things. And I'm still waiting for our third panelist, and I don't know where Thunder is, the Thunder Jew, where he is today, why he is late. But as always, Rob is here. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Stops. Good evening, viewers. Hope you guys are all well this evening. And Stops made an important point. We don't Muslim bash, that's true. We might certainly critique individual Muslims, and we'll normally tell you why we're critiquing them. And if we think that they're making mistakes or they're delusional, I certainly will tell you why. I certainly won't make blanket statements about all Muslims, although I would say one thing, and it's not a Muslim bashing per se, but I do think they're all miscritical thinking at some level. But that's my opinion. But we might say something that or I might say something. I won't say Stops would, because Stops is just so good at not saying those things. But I might say something where I refer to an individual, but then I'll give you reasons why I think X is the case. That doesn't mean that the person is a complete bad person, but they might be delusional, i.e., they believe something that for which they have been shown contrary evidence and they continue believing it. That would be delusion. And if somebody is delusional, then certainly in that respect, I might just point that out.
Okay.
But we have somebody with popcorn already in the chat, so there we go.
Brilliant. We
And if you're
commence, yes, sir, at your service, sir. So, and this is already now the third way that you can participate here, because we're trying always, not to stand on the pulpit and preach down at people, but actually, communicate, chat, discuss, get into a dialogue with people. And this is what we try and do. So I'm always grateful that there are people who are watching, who are interested in what there is to say about Islam, and who agree with us there that there is no real point in only bashing the religion and only going after those people who are quietly praying and who are not really a reason to keep you up at night. On the other hand, we have a lot of people who are taking Islam as a political ideology, who do not split between the God, belief, prayer, heaven as a goal part, and the physical part here on earth, who are trying to implement what is in the scripture, in the Quran, and even worse in the hadith, as law in the country here and today. And that is where I say, no way. This is simply not going to happen. So what we do is we try and bring the facts. We try and show you what the Quran says. We try and show you the arguments of Islam. We're trying to show you now the arguments that are coming from the people. So you can come and join us here on the panel. You can come and chat to us in type chatting. You can ask questions. You can comment. You can critique. You can correct. All these things are possible. So we're not set in our ways. We are not believers per se in God. So we are very open to any kind of suggestion. And yes, if a God were to manifest, of course, I would not reject this, and I would simply say, okay, this God now exists. Whether I worship this God, that's a different story. But I would not be able to reject the fact that a God exists if a God were to suddenly appear in front of me. So we try and use facts, reality, reasoning in a decent way. Right? We definitely agree that we don't like any kind of abuse, any kind of oppression, and this includes slavery, violence, rape, or anything like that. Just come and join us. Just come and talk to us. We've had some discussions last week with Muslim apologists, and I managed to get this in a couple of times. I said, look, guys, if you want to discuss details, come and join us on the Gin and Tonic Show. There's no censorship here. We don't block people. We don't tell people, listen, go and get a different account or something. Now, if somebody goes and only spams and only like this Boma guy did now, all he was doing is just advertising. There was no contents. There was nothing. So we said, listen, this is not what we want. So either you stop this or you're out of here. He didn't stop. So he was kicked. So there you go. So what we do is we help Muslims and non-Muslims alike to understand and handle Islam today in the 21st century. And what we're looking at today is apologists. Last week, what we did is we looked at a video to see how this is being implemented. We looked at apologists, what their arguments are, how they come across towards people, how arrogant and dogmatic and bigoted they are. So, like I said, I am quite capable of changing my mind. But the apologists, the Muslim apologists that I come across to the largest extent are not. Anyway, so this is why we come with reality, with facts, with data, with rational, logical, critical thinking, with reasoning. And I'm trying to leave emotions, sensations, feelings, and all that out of it, because it doesn't really help. If I tell somebody my personal impression that, I don't know, UFO landed on the terrace and took me for a spin around town, I don't think anybody's just like that going to believe it. And they shouldn't. And this is the point. Anything that is claimed without evidence can be rejected without evidence. This is Hitchens' razor and it still works. So what we're going to do is first go through some news, then we're going to go through some Quran sentences, then we're going to go to the theme of the month, which is apologetics, and then finish off with the hadith of the month, of the week. So if I look at the news this week, and this week I have not been as lazy as I was the last week. I'm feeling a lot better, so I was able to do some preparatory work. So Saudi Arabia, KSA, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, is no longer funding mosques in foreign countries. Now, anybody who has worked in the Middle East will know that there's no taxes to speak of. There's no sales tax, there's no income tax, there's no tax on anything. And now, because of the corona crisis and because they are running out of money, because they have been overspending for decades now, they have had to win. I mean, even when I was there in Abu Dhabi, they started introducing a so-called estate tax. So the people who were living there were paying a sort of a tax depending on how and where they were living. So because I had a whole house, I had to pay more than somebody who was living in a flat or somebody who was sharing a room with somebody. And now it's full out. I mean, it's like you have income tax, you have sales tax, you have all sorts of taxes on all sorts of things because they need to generate money. And this is why Saudi is no longer able to fund mosques in foreign countries. Thanks, TS. And I think this is good news because remember the Saudi Arabian, the Wahhabi, the Salafi style Islam that we see being propagated around the world is, or actually maybe it's not, it's probably one of the worst types of Islam, but it's also the reason why Islam is collapsing so quickly. So maybe there's a good news and bad news. So, but I think it's good news that a lot of countries are now making sure that the imams speak the local language. So it's no longer in Arabic. It's no longer, like a coded message where if the imam outside the mosque gets interviewed, it's all about peace and quiet, no compulsion, no nothing. And then they go inside the mosque and they go and kill the kuffar, kill the Jews, do this, do this. So this sort of dichotomy between inside and outside, between public and private, will then disappear because they are being monitored. So that's the good news. Another item which is also sort of down this vein, the Islamic Republic of Iran is now taxing single people. Can you believe this? So it says, Iran cleric proposes making marriage compulsory. And this Iranian cleric wants to tax anyone over 28 for not being married. And this is from June 9th, 2020. So this is recent. This is not something old. No, it's quite recent, last week. And no, this week, actually. So you pay a tax for not being married. Now, the funny thing is, in a country like Germany, they have different tax groups. And one group is being married. So you have a similar system here that if you are married, you pay less tax than you do if you are not. And that is to further the family so that from the old days, the man is able to support the family, pays tax, and then the wife, who is the housewife, is not being taxed, or very, very low if she has any additional income. And this is something that is being introduced in Iran, which I think is quite funny because they need more Muslims. So they're trying to introduce this to, I don't know, maybe they want to instigate more babies. I don't know if you know that, there used to be this thing that in Niger, for example, they used to have like eight children per family. And on the opposite end of the scale was Iran, was the Islamic Republic of Iran, with less than 1.8. And 1.8 is even lower than most European countries. So Iran was producing less offspring than it would take to compensate for the deaths. Because you need, I think 2.3 is the cutoff. 2.3 people to go and complement the population, because a lot of people die due to old age and due to sickness. And I think this is why you need a factor of 2.3. And Iran was 1.8. So they are desperately trying to find more people. Another item was one day after the death of a Saudi prince who was infected with the coronavirus, a medical source revealed that some members of the royal family are undergoing treatment in a hospital and in their private villas after their health deteriorated as a result of the virus. Now, they thought they were immune. They thought their God was protecting them. But we know that due to corona, gods went into hiding. They didn't know what the hell to do with this virus. And a lot of people said, well, we just need to pray, and this didn't help. So Saudi leaks reported that a Dr. Bahabri confirmed that more than 1,200 critical coronavirus infection cases are being treated. That's high. And this Bahabri guy claims that the case spike could be a product of increased social contact during the Eid al-Fitr celebrations on the 25th of May. Remember, there's two Eids in Islam, and the Eid al-Fitr is the one that you get after the Ramadan, after all the fasting, so that you celebrate the end of whatever this holy month. So the people go apeshit, and this is always a big party. It could be that the spike is due to that now. So he says that the patients he monitors claim their symptoms started towards the end of Ramadan and the first days of Eid. So there's a strong indication there. And then the last item I have is that due to COVID-19, this is a funny one, divorces in KSA, in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, are up 30%. I don't know if anybody's going to guess why. It's because women find out that husbands secretly married other women. And because of the coronavirus, they said, well, you need to stay at home. And now they didn't know which home they had to go to. So this is how some women found out that their husbands have other wives, which in Islam is perfectly okay, but you need to tell the other wives about them. And they didn't. And this is why now a lot of women have filed for divorce. I don't know if this is going to go through, but this is quite funny that it takes Corona to go and divulge this information to the poor wives who didn't have any knowledge of this. So this is quite funny. Okay, I saw that you put two comments up, but I didn't see. Go to Nasser channel and duty to an interview with hijab. Basically, he's admitting that the Quran. Okay, this is the old point, that the preservation statement has holes in it. Yeah, this is the old thing. He says, I still believe But the claim that the Quran is preserved can't be substantiated. And Yasser Qadi is one of the most highly respected scholars that we have today because he's alive. Okay, this is not an old guy; he's alive. I maintain that he is going through the motions and he's saying a couple of things on autopilot. I maintain that he has so much doubt in him that there's no way that he still believes everything that he is propagating. But okay,
Yeah, but as we've
time will
seen
tell.
as well, Stops, that we've encountered all kinds of Muslims that believe all kinds of things right there. They claim to be a Muslim. They don't believe. Somehow I've come across some that say the Quran is subjective. You can interpret almost every verse. And when I pointed out there's a verse about pork, well, they kind of admitted that's probably objective. You can't really subjectively take that as something else. So you get all kinds of people who can see the unpleasantness, the lack of adherence to reality around us. And so, they're finding creative ways to kind of have their cake and eat it. But before we
Yeah.
finish, there is one extra story here that I thought I'd add in. I'll just quickly share this here. Hopefully it comes up. Every now and again, something happens. And so this here is basically Saudi, UAE, Bahrain send striking blessings for Jewish New Year. Shifting sands between Trump, the Middle East, and Israel brought some surprising and striking changes for the recently celebrated Jewish New Year. Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, I hope I've pronounced that correctly, probably not, was observed on the 30th to the 1st of October. With the Jewish New Year came greetings and blessings to Jews in Israel and around the world from officials and prominent journalists. In Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain, the well-wishings came in English, Hebrew, and even traditional Jewish New Year songs. First, the Saudi ambassador in Washington, Rima bint Bandar, herself a bit of a mold breaker in Saudi society as a woman and a divorcee, sent the following greeting card. This is the first. The Embassy of Saudi Arabia to Washington, D.C. on this occasion, on Rosh Hashanah, I guess it is, Her Highness and Ambassador Rima Bandi Al Saud sends her wishes for a happy and sweet new year. Next, we saw the UAE's Minister of Foreign Affairs wish Jews a Santa Tova, Hebrew for a good year. And then the Bahraini person said the same. And so basically there were Muslims from what would have otherwise been predominantly very conservative Muslim countries who are often seen as very, very hostile to Israel, sending New Year's greetings. Now, again, we may not probably need to read too much in, but at least we can say there is something positive that's being said. Whether the sentiment or intent behind it is in fact positive, we don't know. We can't read minds, but at least on the surface, something different happened. So there we go.
That's quite amazing.
Yeah,
The next thing is,
surprising.
do you want to come to my room? So,
So
wow,
yeah, it's interesting.
that is interesting indeed. Yeah, I
Maybe
just wish
tides are changing. They realize that
exactly.
Israel is here to stay, and to do anything else is going to be counterproductive. Even if they wish Israel weren't there, there's not much they could do about it. And so maybe it's a case of, okay, let's try and be friendly for our own good, rather than because we suddenly have an affinity with Israel. But yeah, it's unusual because normally they wouldn't say anything, or they'd probably say something quite negative. So who knows?
And it is interesting, and it gives me hope that there is a sign that people are talking to each other, and I think that is the most important thing. Now, I don't know how Israel is going to react to this. I don't know if Israel is going to be able to lay off their expansion politics and just keep a bloody low profile, and because they are destroying so much themselves. I don't know why they're doing that. I always said Israel. I would love to be their PRO, because there's so much that you can get out of the country that is positive if only they would shut the fuck up for a while. Stop doing all their shit. Stop, causing scenes which are unnecessary. So they are shooting themselves in the foot all the time. So I don't think there's any point in doing what they are doing. They should also be throwing oil on the waves and not into the fire, which is what they're doing. So, yeah.
Oh,
But
one other
good
thing here.
point.
Another quick one. Did free women beat World Hijab Day this year? This year's World Hijab Day faced stiff competition from a counter movement, Free from Hijab and No Hijab Day. And there's a little blurb on it there. And down here, the hashtag Free from Hijab was trending on Twitter on February 1st, while World Hijab Day was not. It was clear who the winner was, Free from Hijab. However, Twitter isn't the only social media outlet. It's just a social media outlet most activists are on. And so World Hijab Day yielded 23,000 on Instagram, whereas Free from Hijab was only 730 posts. So it depends on which social media you are talking about.
What I'd like to see is the trend over the years.
Yeah.
Oh, look who joined! Finally! Wow! Oh, did you click on add and I? We both clicked at the same time.
Yeah.
Welcome.
Good afternoon, good evening, everybody. I do apologize for being late.
Good morning. Good morning.
We're getting used to it.
How you doing?
I'm fine, thank you, guys. Has the show started?
Yes.
No, we were waiting for you. We were just banding around until you arrived. Now we can start properly.
Okay, so on all seriousness, has the show actually started?
30 minutes ago, 20 minutes ago.
Okay, then. So have we done the Quran yet? Where are we in the show? I don't know where we are.
No,
Sorry.
no. Quran
I'm
just
now
coming
going
up
to
now.
the Quran.
Excellent. So I've joined at the right time. Excellent. Sorry, guys. Sorry, everybody. Let's crack on then.
Now, because I felt a little bit more creative this week, I managed to catch up on all the sentences I missed out on before. So we don't need to go through them again, right? I think
where are we now?
I think we went to 20.
Okay, so we're on 20, are we? Yeah.
So we went from 0 to 10, then from 10 to 20, and now it's 20 to 30, 31. So 20 is that Jews and Christians. Now, again, what we're doing here, this is the Reader's Digest version. This is my condensed version, all right? This is my attempt at making the Quran more concise, more focused on the contents itself without all the da-da-da-da-da, and I'm the bestest, greatest, the most stable genius and everything of all the other gods. No, I just went and looked at the content itself to get to the nuggets, as it were, that you can find. So if you go and read, maybe we'll have an example just now, because I like the fact that Thunderous and Rob are reading along in their own original translations, and check me as I go along to make sure that I'm making sense. So my interpretation of chapter 6, sentence number 20 is that Jews and Christians recognize God / Muhammad, it's not quite sure for me, as they recognize their kids. But those who lose their souls are non-believers. Do you want to go through the original quickly just to show?
Yeah, it's pretty much what it says
really
almost.
is?
Yeah, I think that's pretty much what it says there. Does it get any bigger? Yeah, it does a little bit. Those whom we have given the book now know this as they know their own sons. Those who have lost their own souls refuse therefore to believe. Now, I'm wondering what losing your soul, how does one lose one's soul? Is not quite sure.
If you don't look after it.
Presumably you always have a soul, because if you die, you're going to be in Islam, you're going to be judged, aren't you? So I'm not sure. So obviously we can't take that literally, right? Although there's no caveat or star there to say take this metaphorically. But presumably you can't take it literally, because if you lost your soul, well, then you couldn't be judged, and you just, it's called annihilation theory. Some people believe that when you die, you die not believing in Islam or whatever the case is, then nothing happens. You literally are annihilated, right? That's not particularly popular in Islam. I think it's more popular elsewhere. But presumably, if you don't believe in annihilation theory, then you couldn't lose your soul. Maybe you just don't believe in the soul is coming along somehow, but I don't think you can lose it per se.
Maybe you
and
take it off. You put it into the glass next to you on the bedside table with some cleaning
but
liquid or something.
it's somehow attached, though, I'm presuming. I've never heard from Muslims exactly how this works, but there we go. Go on.
Maybe maybe if you consider it as some kind of analogous to life force, which is the force that accentuating the human being that keeps them alive, so to speak, the life force. If it's some kind of analogous to that, and it says that they've lost their soul, it's a bit like when you have the phrase "you sold your soul to the devil." So you've lost your life in that sense, that because you've not followed Allah, you've lost your life, or whatever it was you were ever gonna earn from it, going up to heaven. That's all been lost. You've got nothing but doom and gloom before you. That kind of veiled threat in that kind of poetic language. That's what I'm getting from it anyway.
Yeah,
it's kind of poetic, right? You can't use it literally. Yeah.
There it says that you're forced to burn souls. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. Let's go to 21. The non-believers who lie and reject the signs are losers. Do you want to check this quickly?
Who doth more wrong than he who inventeth a lie against Allah or rejecteth his signs? But verily the wrongdoers shall never prosper. Who doth more wrong than he who inventeth a lie against Allah and rejecteth it? Well, probably somebody that, I don't know, murders, rapes, has slaves, kills apostates. Those would probably be more wrong, I guess. Unless you're Allah, who takes it far more personally, that you reject him, even though he's given you a mind and you were going to do it. So, again, I'm not sure I get the moral compass here, to be honest.
Well, the other thing is, how can you? I mean, you were created by this Allah. How can you invent a lie against Allah if you have not been given the capability to do so?
And he knew you were going to do it, right?
Exactly.
So he knew you were going to bring forth a falsehood and then ask what's more wrong. Presumably the person that knew that was going to happen and knew that it was wrong and didn't inform the person who had to make it wrong. That's what would be more wrong in my view. So in this case, good old Allah itself. But all roads lead back to Allah, right? So what can you say?
Yeah.
So what would be more wrong? Allah doing this.
In Catch-22, it's so cute that you want to know my definition of a word that doesn't exist. Because there is no ism. Communism has a goal, has a leader, has doctrine, has dogma, has all sorts of things. Not believing dragons as exist doesn't have that. So there is no a-dragonism. Now, what I do is I accept that atheism is just the expression that people use taken from the past, because historically the Christians were so shit scared of atheists that they gave them the name atheist and came up with this being of a God believer hiding the truth and rejecting, denying the existence of gods, that they came up with these words. Now, I reject this simply because of today we no longer need this. And this is why the norm, the way that it was 2,000 years ago, where everybody believed in the God and this was the norm, today the norm should be different. Today the norm, the null hypothesis, the standard situation should be, no, I'm just a person without a God. If you then decide, well, it's not good enough for me, I need this idea and I like the concept, and without this it doesn't really make much sense for me, then you're welcome to do so. But then this is not the norm. It's the same thing as I always say. If you have a table is a table. If you add red to the table, it's a red table. But if you don't add anything to it, it remains a table. The same thing with a person. If you don't add a God, it just remains a person. Does that make it clear? Thank you. 22.
Go on, Andres, you wanted to say something? Hang on, Stops. I think
no, it'll end up in the to-do between me and Stops, and let's just move on.
No, this is just my definition. This is just my understanding.
Yeah, but But when you say things like Christians were shit scared of atheists, you really shouldn't be saying things like that. There's no historical evidence of Christians being shit scared of anything other than tigers and lions in the den.
No,
Or
they
maybe
were
hell.
persecuting, they were killing,
agree,
they were
Thunderous,
doing all sorts of things.
That's a man-made doctrine, hell. There is no text that talk about hell. The only book you'll find hell in is inside the Quran, because the Greek and Hebrew scriptures don't mention hell. The word Hades and Sheol have been translated into hell, but there are other scriptures inside the Bible that prove categorically there is no location called hell, the fiery torment. That is a pagan myth that was grafted into the Bible, probably about the 2nd, 3rd century. The Jews never believed it, and the 1st century Christians never believed it. There is historical evidence to that point, and including the Bible itself. Hell, the only location you'll find it, probably Zoroastrianism and the Quran. And considering the Quran came post Zoroastrianism, we can conclude where its fiery hell came from: Zoroastrianism.
And TDS Dave is actually right, that it was the Christians who were the non-believers, the atheists, because they didn't believe in Zeus and Apollo and all these others. Okay, sentence number 22. And I'm sorry, if somebody doesn't understand it, I can't help them any further. All humans were called together and non-believers were asked where their gods are.
Let's see. This one here says, can I just read it from the Yusuf Ali translation?
Go on.
It says, one day we shall gather them together. We shall say to those who ascribe partners, now in brackets, to us, where are the partners whom you invented and talked about? The point I want to get to, who is the to us part? Who is the reference to us?
This is the Islamic God who is talking in the this pluralis majestatis, which is
Elizabethan English. So I don't accept that. I think this is either one of two things. Either this is the 50-50 relationship of power between Muhammad and Allah, or when the Jews use the word, at the beginning of the Bible says, let us make man in our image, there is a plurality there. This is where Muhammad's getting it confused. And he doesn't know what that phrase actually meant when it said that.
Okay. I do not
accept this mystery that somehow Elizabethan English originated in this majestic sense from the Quran, or that the Quran is speaking in the plurality of God in the majestic sense. I do not accept that.
Okay,
because that makes sense. It says that one day we shall gather together, we shall say to those who ascribe partners to us. Even if in the majestic sense, you do not use that phrase, to us.
No, you don't. But then I don't believe this hypothesis that Muhammad or that a single person wrote the Quran. There are too many indications that this was the product of many hands, many different kinds of styles and different types of writing. So this is a cobbled together piece of, text from different sources. And they confuse. I mean, we've seen this so many times. It constantly switches between I and we and me and you and he and it. It constantly switches. And in several instances, it even says that I am doing something to this other Allah because they fell out of their role and they forgot who they actually are, and suddenly we're talking about other gods.
I don't know if you guys have discussed this or if this is going to come up later. And just on the side point, just something that you mentioned there, Stops, about the many hands in the Quran. Have you guys listened to Yasser Qadi and Muhammad Hijab in the past couple of days?
I have not.
Funny you mentioned that. Somebody in the chat pointed it out. There was a video. We haven't seen it, but somebody pointed out.
I thoroughly recommend it. I won't make mention of it. I think personally, it might be a topic for discussion on one of the shows.
But we've discussed it already. But we can take it up again because this is now a current topic because it was raised by hijab. And this is a confrontation that he always has because hijab is stupid. Okay, he's like a baby intellectually, and this is why he goes and confronts Yasser Qadi, thinking that he can make some brownie points. And I'm sure this backfired. I'm sure that Yasser Qadi says, "Look, this is the situation, but it doesn't really matter because it's this and this and this, and you're an idiot." Okay, so I'm sure this is what happened. Anyway, you've got the link there. Thank you very much for TDS for providing it, because this really is going to be interesting. Because if this is now going to escalate, if now people are questioning a scholar, an established scholar, it shows you how torn Islam actually is. And this and I mean, imagine if Yasser Qadi actually went out and said, "Look, guys, I've had it. I can't anymore. I am intellectually honest, and I have to throw in the towel. It does not make sense." Like, like Bart Ehrman did, or there's a couple of people who suddenly said, "No, whatever you say about the Old Testament and the New Testament and all this, you have to take it with a pinch of salt." And suddenly, this was a sensation. And if we have something like that, well, who knows? Okay, but that's going too far away now. All humans were called together. Non-believers were asked what their gods are. I think we agreed this is this. And then in 23, they said, "What gods?" And then in 24, they lied, and their gods abandoned them. Now, this is going into the eschatology, okay? Because now everything is going, okay, you are living your life the way that you want it. You have free will. I don't know what you're going to do in the future. It's up to you to do the right thing. And I'm telling you now, if you go and take a decision that is wrong, I'm going to punish you. So you're going to be the loser. And if you follow what I'm telling you to do, even if you pretend, even if you think that I'm the idiot who's going to believe whatever your motions are, that they are sincere, even though it says a couple of times in the Quran, I know better than what you know, then I'm still going to see this as a positive act, even if you pretend. But if you are honest and you say no, then I'm going to punish you. And this, they said, they lied, their gods abandoned them, and non-believers, and this is now the funny thing, non-believers are prevented from believing and see the stories are old. So they realize that. And then in 26, it says non-believers are prevented from, 26, they harm themselves by avoiding these stories and preventing others from seeing them. And when they face torture, they want to go back. Yeah, but why do they want to go back? That's illogical, because now look what the next sentence says. If they would, the situation would be the same. So this is like a deterministic attitude. So you can't change anything. So I have determined what is going to happen. And even if you go back, even if you realize you've made a mistake, even if I allow you to go back, you will then make the same mistake, because that is how you were created. And now he says, well, you say we only have this one life. And now the merciful Creator God sends them for eternal torture. Now, how is that logical? And then says, it's their own fault. So he creates the people, then prevents them from believing, then says, well, it's your own fault, and now I'm going to punish you. Come on.
Yeah, there's a lot in there. I think the 625 is a problematic one. And here's like one of the tough seers with Al-Jalalain. Well, let's just go back to 625 first, for a moment here. Of them, that there are some who pretend to listen to thee, but we have thrown veils over their hearts, so they understand it not, and deafness in their ears. If they saw every one of the signs, not they will believe in them, in so much that when they come to thee, they but dispute with thee. The unbelievers say there is nothing but tales of the ancients. Very difficult.
You see now how much work it is to get to the essence of this? It's crazy.
Sorry, International. Let's just see if that makes it a little easier to read. Among those who and among them who are those who listen to you, but we placed over their heart coverings, lest they understand it, and in their ears deafness. And if they see every sign, they will not believe in it. Even if they come to you arguing with you, those who disbelieve say this is not but legends of the former peoples. Obviously, that's problematic. And here's what's his name, Al-Jalalain. There are some who listen to you when you recite, and we have placed veils, covers upon their hearts, so they do not understand it, so that they do not comprehend the Quran. and in their ears is heaviness, a deafness, so they do not hear it, or the willingness to accept it. And if they were to see every sign, they would not believe it. So that when they come to you and argue with you, the disbelievers say this Quran is nothing but fables and lies. And, okay, so he's kind of just repeating what they're saying there. But that's entirely problematic and unfalsifiable, right? Because if you came there and you said, because there's no methodology here, is there? If there was a methodology and you could follow it and then either come to a correct understanding or an incorrect understanding, that would be one thing. But if there isn't a methodology here, then this is like an unfalsifiable claim. In their ears heaviness, and they do not hear it with willingness to accept it. Well, presumably people like us, in order for us to be willing to accept it, it needs to make sense and it needs to be rationally justified and have substantial evidence in its favor. And so that's at least my benchmark, may or may not be yourselves, or you might elaborate on that. But what is a willingness? Just to accept it blindly? Well, no, most Muslims push back. We don't believe blindly, they repeatedly tell us. We believe because there's reasons. Well, okay, what happens about those who don't believe? Is that Allah doing that, or is that us reading the Quran and seeing that this is so clearly man-made to us that no God could possibly have written something so poor?
Exactly.
Unless you've got a very, very low bar, right? Which I think is, they have to have a low bar, because if you had a high bar like we have, your God would never pass it. In other words, you wouldn't believe this. So you have to lower the bar to incredibly low level in order for that to accept that, hey, there's something godly about this. But that's a poor way of doing it. If you have to lower the bar, why not raise the bar? Because if you raise the bar, and of course this is an almighty God, then he could trivially, easily meet the standard that you put forward, that he knew you were going to put forward, and that he gave you a mind to critique anyway. So all you're doing is testing the God that already knew you were going to do this, and he could easily help you or pass the test, or help you pass the test by providing substantial reasons and evidence. So there we go.
Yeah, okay. That was sentences 20 to 31.
I suppose one quick thing stops, and maybe you and Thunderous can comment on this. Have you guys ever spoke to apologists or Dawa people and ever mentioned to them? I can't remember that I have. I may have done, but I don't remember it in recent history, where I've said to them, why are you guys doing Dawa? If in fact there's people who disbelieve, then according to 625, then they, and especially if they've understood the Quran, then apparently understood it, or at least claim to have understood, or at least read it, then there's been a veil placed over their hearts, i.e. that we're suppressing the truth in unrighteousness is the term I've heard used, not so much by Muslims, but that's a term that's been used by presuppositionists. So you do know it, it's just that you're suppressing it. Now, I've not heard a Muslim use that, but what have you guys said? Have you ever quoted this to them, and what has been their response to you? But if you guys have ever done that.
I have. The response was, if you really repent, you will find Allah merciful, because he will forgive everything. Well, except shirk, but this is not shirk.
So, but that doesn't answer the question though, right?
No.
Why am I asking for forgiveness? I first need to believe, because
Yes.
the book is so overwhelmingly convincing to me. Otherwise, that statement is just like vacuous. Why would I believe, a non-entity is going to do something?
This is the problem. That's all they have. If you ask a Muslim apologist, the only answer you will ever get is you need to believe, and then Allah will guide you, and then you will understand it. But you first need to believe. This is the big
But that's
step you need to
self-defeating
take.
for their position.
Yes, it is. But that's all they have.
I mean, Thunderous, have you heard anything different? Have you ever, I'm sure you have, because you've mentioned this multiple times before about this hearts being covered and so forth. I'm not sure if you're there, but if you are, have you ever had a Muslim respond in any different way to what Stops has said?
No, because I've never used this kind of angle to speak to a Muslim. I've always used it from the perspective of that everything's been predestined, because the Quran talks about, for instance, to go back to chapter 2, and I repeat this many times about, particularly last week we discussed it about if they'd gone and fought, then they would have died anyway. So I use the predestination point that it's all Allah's will anyway. So regardless of whether a person's heart's veiled, if a person's heart's veiled, that's because Allah's made it veiled. So you can't blame the person if Allah's veiled the heart himself. If like when a person dies, Allah has judged that person to die at that moment in time because he was predestined to die. And I've not used it in that context. I've more often used it with Muslims when they're moaning about like American foreign policy and things like that. And I said, well, it's Allah's will anyway. That's why Allah wants America to be great, because he's predestined America to be great. He's predestined Europe to be great. And he's predestined all Muslim countries to be the backwards, sort of like the sand between your toes of the planet. That's Allah's will. So that's always been the direction I've gone in with dialogue. I've not sort of like used Allah veiling heart in this context. It's always been, if you like, predestination, and that's for every mankind. So when a woman gets raped, or if someone gets murdered, or if a American drone wipes out a family wedding session in Afghanistan by a drone, it was Allah's will. So I've always gone with the Allah's will side of things.
Well, a kind of side point, I was just going to bring up something that's kind of like, well, not a side point, analogous with this sort of thing. It'll come back to me in a second, I'm sure. Stops carry on, it'll suddenly pop into my brain, and then I'll ask you guys, because it was on this point.
But Thunder, if you think back, if somebody would have confronted you with this when you were still a Muslim, what would you have replied?
Well, then I would have just turned around and said, well, where's the freedom of choice in that then? See, for me, but then that would have been more of a mature question for a 13, 14, 15-year-old. You've got to remember, I left at 16. I could see, when I say I could see through it, I wasn't sort of like a Hafiz. I didn't know the Quran off by heart, and therefore I knew everything in it and all the doctrines. It was other things that made me leave Islam, not necessarily this sort of stuff. But if I was confronted then with the point that there is no choice and everything is done by the will of Allah, so if I believe in Allah or if I don't believe in Allah, I don't have a choice in that. I think the closest I can come to a response is when I was told who I can and can't marry. I have to marry another Muslim, blah, blah, blah. My argument with my dad was, no, I'll marry who I want to marry. I won't be told who to marry. It's my choice. It's my life. So I think I'd have used an argument very much in that same way if I was confronted with this kind of theology from the Quran. Though I wasn't confronted with that.
I don't know if you've mentioned to other people that you left when you were 16. I would, if I was playing devil's advocate now, I would imagine that the Muslims say, well, you couldn't have, if you left at that stage, you didn't really know enough about Islam, right? That would be the Ali Dawah hijab type of approach. There must be something wrong with you. You couldn't have left because there's good reasons. And so when you say that young age, then clearly...
Well, I knew more than Aisha.
Well, I mean, they would just point to your age and say, okay, you weren't mature enough. How well did you study it, right? Because that's the angle, right? If you leave, there must be a problem with you, right? That's the approach.
A man can be 99 years old, 79 years old, 69 years old. A man can be 49 years old, leave Islam, and the argument will be saying, you never allowed Islam to enter the heart. You never understood real Islam. You only got Islam from Google. You got Islam from the wrong scholars. You never read it in Arabic. You don't understand Arabic. You got to understand. Do you know what I'm saying? Well, the argument is endless as to why people do not end Islam. Sorry, why people leave Islam, and the arguments are never because of the Quran and it's because of the hadith. It's never that.
Which reminds me, Stops. Exactly. Right. And so Stops, that reminds me, between us, while we're going through, we were just doing it in the spur of the moment. But could we find those steps that apologists use? I'm sure you are familiar with them. I am too. Where, hey, there's certain things, right? So like Thunderous would say that there'd be these steps to follow. It's like a script to follow, right? That apologists use. And eventually it gets to the point where if we can bring that up, we can talk about it. It's kind of entertaining, amusing, and probably somewhat educational as well. And then you can notice how certain Muslims do it when they go through to quite kind of run their apologetics, right? There's this series of steps they go through, right? One of them being eventually at some point, oh, well, it's not in Arabic. Then the next thing is, well, this, that, and the other. There's a list of this somewhere. I'll see if I can find it. Maybe you've got it, Stops to hand, or maybe Thunderous, you've got it. Because we've talked about it, I'm sure, before, but this month being a month of that, that could be a good thing to bring up to show people. And then
I've created
show people how it works.
I've created one on my actual iPod, sorry, iPad, because
I think
I
there's
write notes
several.
constantly. I'm constantly writing notes. I'm just going to go into my notes now, and I'll read the list. That's why I came off quite with like a verbatim that's spilled off my mouth, because I've written them down and I've used them. Here they are. The Quran you quote is poor translation. The Quran you quote is only 5% accurate. I got this one in Oxford from a guy handing out Qurans, and he says, well, it's only 5% accurate. And I just turned around and said to him, so I guess the other 95% is inaccurate then. So what was the point handing it out if it's only 5% accurate? The hadith you use is false. The hadith you use is weak. You've taken the hadith out of context. Have you learned Arabic? Islam can only be understood in Arabic. Do you read Arabic? Do you read classical Arabic? The Quran was revealed in classical Arabic. The surah of the Quran you've quoted is taken out of context. You hate Islam. You're a Islamophobe. You've been brainwashed. You're a Zionist. You're a right-wing racist. You're Illuminati. You were never a real Muslim. You do not allow Islam to enter into your heart. You learned Islam from the wrong scholars. You do not offer salat 5 times a day. You get your Islam from Google. You're a Western foreign policy supporter. You mistranslated the ayah. You misinterpreted the ayah. You misunderstood the ayah. You do not understand rhetorical devices. You have not understood Arabic etymology. Each root word can have 10 meanings. Is there any others I didn't put on the list I've not come across?
You're a Zionist.
To be honest, you went through them so fast, I was trying to keep up there. It's a shame you can't share screen and put that up.
There were two.
Because I'm looking for the list that you
one.
just went through. Have you got it? And Thundress, because you went through it so fast, you'll be able to see on the list now. Is there any you left? Any you left out? Because I think you had quite a good list there.
I'll go for it slowly.
Well, let's just put it up on screen so everybody can see it as well. Unless it stops. Have you got a similar list to Thunderous?
No. Nowhere
What's your
near
one?
it. Mine is like 6 steps or 7.
Oh, okay. Put that up, and then we'll have Thunderous add his ones in, maybe if we can.
No,
do that.
use Thunderous. I mean, this is the most complete list I've ever heard of.
Okay, so repeat it again.
I'll repeat it from the top again then, right? The Quran you quote is a poor translation.
Can you copy and paste it onto some sort of thing and share it? Because reading along is always a lot easier.
Yeah, sure. Let me try something now then, because this is on my iPad, so I'll have to go round about. Let me see if I can do something here.
If you're on StreamYard with your iPad, I'm not sure if you can share screen, unfortunately. But the other thing we'll do, as Thunderous goes through this, we'll stop at each one. Let's give our responses as well, and then see if there's a devil's advocate response, or if you're a Muslim listening, give us your response to this, right? Because obviously, if you've got all of these responses, how do we respond to it? Oh, there we go.
Then let's do this one quickly. This is
make it bigger, stops.
Bigger than this. Okay.
Okay, there you go.
So this is from an anti-Islamic site. This is one argument. It's your information comes from an anti-Islamic site, therefore it's wrong automatically. And I think I can't even remember. I think this is from Robert or Pam or one of those people. And he or she has made a collection. If Islam were a violent religion, then all Muslims would be violent. I mean, I've heard this so many times. I would be very rich if I would have just £1 for every time I heard this.
Okay, well, let's go through and debunk each one of these, shall we?
So this is definitely wrong, because it's not about the individual implementation of the people, because the people are better than their God. It's about the doctrine.
Yeah, quite right. They're all individuals, and especially individuals in Western countries. Look at those violent verses, and they've got to find some way to sidestep them or reinterpret them or whatever the case is. So that's a non sequitur. It would only be the case if all Muslims accurately followed the straightforward reading of the Quran if that were the case, but they're human beings, they interpret, in which case it doesn't follow that if it's a violent religion, then necessarily all Muslims will be violent. So that's a non sequitur, it doesn't follow. Logical fallacy.
On the other hand,
okay.
the point that this is actually making is that Islam does give you the basis to do that. That is the point. If I go to 2 other religions, kill 2. Okay, this is the Tukwakwe. This is typical because it doesn't really matter.
And in fact, it's worse than that. You're absolutely right. But it's also conceding that Islam does do this. So
yeah.
the moment you do a tu quo quo, you're conceding your side of the argument does it, but hey, somebody else does it too. It's almost like a red herring to say, well, other people do it, so it's not so bad. But then you're conceding that there is violence there.
Yeah. And yeah, it doesn't really matter, because the thing is, if you start saying, yeah, but Christianity also has some dirty parts in the Old Testament or the New Testament, yeah, sure, but we don't have this anymore. There's been a reformation. There's been a turn away from this, that Christians don't run around anymore and say, yeah, I kill you in the name of Christianity. This does not exist. You could theoretically do that, but it doesn't happen. Whereas we have a lot of people who run around screaming Allahu Akbar and then kill people. This is the difference. Where does the Quran say to kill innocent people? Well, this is this is such
that's begging the question, right?
Is it? I don't know.
Begging
is
the
it
question
both?
about against innocent. What does it mean to be innocent? So it's like saying,
and number 2, why would you need the qualifier innocent?
Well, because they're quite well aware that, does stipulate, and Muhammad said it as well, to kill various
so
people.
Where does
Their
the Quran
argument
say
is
to
that it was
kill
only
people?
defensive.
Exactly. The question should be, where does the Quran say kill people? This is the point. If the Quran would say don't kill anyone, that would be perfectly acceptable. But now that you have to go and qualify this with adding innocent, without defining it, without saying anything, already shows that this is not an honest argument.
Yeah, because the whole argument really revolves around, because I think most of us would agree, all 3 of us here, unless you were a pacifist, unless you were a Jain, there are certain circumstances in which taking somebody's life is justified and morally a good thing to do. So I think we can all think of circumstances like that.
Yes.
But it's begging the question against us or against anybody else to say, well, innocent people, who gets to decide what innocent is? That's the conclusion at the end. If in fact somebody was innocent and the Quran doesn't say that, fine, then your argument stands. But to put it into your premise is, begging the question, because you need to establish that the Quran, what innocent is, and the fact that the Quran doesn't say to kill these people, and we would have to agree, and then you'd have a case.
I think this is one of those situations where you have to look at the whole Quran, pick up the appropriate verses, then you'll see a better picture. When your own God in 98:6, I think it says that you're the worst of creatures, and then the very next verse from the one that says if he's killed an innocent, he slayed all mankind, is to slay anybody who causes mischief in the land. I think just those 2 verses alone are enough to show you kill non-Muslims.
And it doesn't actually say to kill innocent people, because exactly what you are saying now, somebody who's causing mischief is, in my eyes, innocent. And this is where we get into the definition of innocent. Yeah. Okay, Muhammad preached no compulsion in Islam, in religion.
When did he say that? That was at the beginning. If there's no compulsion in religion, like that, when somebody says there's no compulsion in religion, this is where, right, you get retarded people, deliberately deceitful people, con artists that are trying to pacify Islam to ignorant people. That there's no compulsion in religion. First of all, that was at the beginning of Islam, Muhammad's campaign as a prophet. But then, if there's no compulsion in religion, then why are apostates executed?
Yeah. Oh, we have
and also, as you quite
Facebook.
rightly point
Hello,
out,
Gavin. Thank you very much for your comment. It's very rare that we see somebody commenting from Facebook. Welcome.
I think Thunderous has got it there in the sense of what's the context, right? Whenever you pull up something that is ostensibly negative, the first thing a Muslim will say is, well, what is the context around that, right? If you make a contextless statement, that can be seen anyway. And I think to some degree that's a fair comment. But then we've got to ask the same thing of a Muslim in this case. So if somebody makes this claim, what is the context? And of course, as Thunderous pointed out, as far as we can tell, the context, this was the early stages of Islam when he had no power and he wanted to ingratiate himself with the more powerful people around, and basically said, hey, there's no compulsion. You believe your thing, I believe mine, etc. But that eventually got abrogated, or at least appears to have been, when he became powerful. And then it wasn't a case of there's no compulsion. But they never tell you that part. But as soon as you bring a critique, then the hypocrites, when they're out there, are going to ask you for the context. And all we need to do is ask the same there.
This goes back to discussions we've had in the past where the response is, this is where you get the twofold Islam. You got the Islam that is applied to Islamically controlled countries, then you got the Islam that you advertise in Western countries. And this is a typical Western country version of Islam, to pacify non-believers, to introduce people to Quran that it's a lovely, peaceful religion, and it preys on the ignorance, the weak and the obtuse.
Exactly right. But what we could actually do, right? If somebody brought this verse up, bring up what's at 434, is it? Remind me. If you see a Jew behind the tree or you see a man behind the tree, kill him, right behind the rock.
That's hadith.
Which one is the one there where you I thought it was 434. No, that's the sword, isn't it? Is it not 434?
No. There's you have the one which says whoever kills, and then the following 133 says fight them wherever you find them.
Yes. Now, so you could point that out, right? But the immediate response will be, hang on a moment, what's the context of that? I think one way to defeat this particular one, number 4, is to bring up a counter verse without the context, because they're not giving the context. So you do the same. Immediately they won't accept that, and they'll ask you for the context. When will that happen? It happened X, Y, and Z, right? When did this happen? And that's another way because otherwise you're fighting over, well, you should give context, but all you need to give is another verse without context to show reductio ad absurdum, as it's called. Just give a counterexample that reduces their argument to absurdity, and then they would be forced to have to ask about the context, in which case they'd have to give you the context of that verse as well.
Well, what I do is I say, look, the Quran says 105 times to kill non-believers or to punish them for eternity. So that is a lot of compulsion. You can't tell somebody holding a gun to the head, there's no compulsion. You can choose whichever way you want. That doesn't work. That is compulsion.
I think they would argue, those stops, that's not a compulsion by humans. That's God's order, right? Here they would argue, they would potentially, if I play devil's advocate, counter you and say, well, hey, this is about people, not compelling other people to religion. What you're talking about with those 105 verses is Allah reminding people of his judgment, his wrath, whatever the case is.
But this is interesting. Hassan, welcome. Excellent. I love, exactly. This is exactly the point. So this is the tap dancing that you get. So you would see, he says in entering it. So you see, this is again moving the goalpost, because it's not really compulsion in the religion itself, but it's entering it. So there you go. This is a good way of doing it. Oh, it's so classic. And it's lovely to have somebody who knows these things, the details. This is lovely. Shit. Hassan, why don't you come and join us more often? Yes, you are so valuable with your head, what you have in there. It's a pity that you are in retirement. Okay, Muhammad preached no compulsion, then it's the Crusades. I mean, the Crusades, that was 1100.
Tu quo quo, and that was a response to what? Muslim invasion, right?
And that's exactly the point. End of story. Number 6, Andalusian paradise, tolerance of Muslim Spain. Never existed. Bullshit. Muhammad never killed anyone. Also bullshit. Of course he did. There were lots and lots and lots of battles. Go and read the Sirah, where he beheaded I don't know how many 100 people who were passed to him. That's ridiculous. Muhammad plundered, killed, tortured, raped, enslaved. He did all sorts of things. Come on. That's not a role model for today. The Quran teaches that all life... Sorry?
So he also executed people that were critics of his. He executed critics.
No, not himself. He had them.
No, but he ordered it. What's the difference?
Yes.
If you get someone else...
This is the fine print. If somebody says, who will rid me of this person, this is the way that it's formulated, is not the same as I am going to hold the knife and stick it into his heart.
Yeah, but I think he's equally guilty. I think Thunderous's point is if you were to be judged by other rational human beings, that you'd be equally guilty of saying, "Who will rid me?" And I command you, my followers, to rid me of. And if
Well,
you're doing that,
Hitler-
then it's a command. Then you're like Hitler, right, in a sense, aren't you?
Yeah, but the
Because
killer
Hitler's
has a
more-
higher.
So Hitler, Stalin, and Mao and Pol Pot were not murderers then, because they
Yeah,
never.
exactly.
yeah.
This-
They're
because
almost
they never
more
killed
guilty.
anybody themselves.
Not almost. I think they are. I think most human beings see them as more guilty than the people they commanded to carry out the atrocities. They're guilty as well,
Of course.
but the buck stops with the main person, right? They've got blood on their hands, even if they didn't do the act themselves. They're in fact almost more guilty, one could argue.
Yeah. And thinking clearly, the point, I thought this was now a thing of the past. Imrit Scott and other, there are many historians who have clarified this. And we know today that this invasion into Spain, into the Iberian Peninsula, I should say, cost about 7 million lives, because now today more and more historians are digging up texts from the old days and old churches and things like that, and they are looking at the documents and they see what happened in those days. And the other thing is they went all the way up to Poitiers. And if Martel hadn't stopped them, they would have carried on. So this whole thing with the Andalusian paradise, this is one big storm, and that's absolutely stupid. Okay, Muslim Quran teaches all life is sacred. No, it doesn't. We've just been through 532 and 533. Muslims are to only kill in self-defense. Show me this. It doesn't say this. Anywhere in the text in the Quran, it never says this. So don't talk shit, really. I mean, if Muslims only kill in self-defense, what was the self-defense when they were killing the Spanish people or the Indians? The Persians. What was the self-defense? I'm not aware of Somalis coming into Saudi and into the Arabian Peninsula and killing people so that they had to defend themselves. No, they went and conquered. The same with the Egyptians, same with all the other countries.
If Islam was only to kill in self-defense, then Islam would have just stayed in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, that's it. Verses of violence are taken out of context. Okay, we've just been through this. No, they're not. Islam must be true because the world's fastest growing religion. Well, it's not. It's the fastest collapsing religion. This is just propaganda that people are putting out. And the funny thing is, they always bring out the projection from Pew, okay, where they say in 2050 we're going to have a reversal where Muslims are going to be more numerous than Christians. But this is just a projection. If you look at the trend, if you look at the analysis of the current numbers over the last 10 years, we see a very, very different trend. And the thing is that the Pew, I did a whole video of like half an hour explaining how all this happens, how this is self-information. They call up a mosque and say, how many followers do you have? And then after they've called all the mosques, they say, okay, we have a total of 20 million, so this is the number of Muslims in there. That a lot of people are counted double and triple. And this, I always use this example because Yemen suddenly had more Muslims than population. This is exactly what happened. So this doesn't work.
But even
Okay,
if it
Quran.
were, but even if it were the case, right? All that's happening
wouldn't
is
matter,
it's
exactly.
by birth rate. And I think that's kind of where I'm somewhat on the side of Dawkins. You wouldn't call somebody a Christian child, a Muslim child, an atheist child. They're a child. Because if you were to do that, then you would also call them, a conservative child, a liberal child, or something like that. What is the difference there? And so they're not in a position where they can make a rational choice. So if you're going to subsume them under the guise of Islam and say, hey, because, Muslims probably have more children per family than other groups, then are those Muslims because they were born to Muslim people? They haven't had the ability to read or understand. To me, they're non-theists. It's like a rock or a goat or something else. At this point, they have no idea about the ideology. They therefore cannot form a rational belief one way or the other, and so they would fall under the group non-theist. So you couldn't actually call them Muslims. So you would then have to count how many people identify as Muslim, and that's much harder to do. And there you're right. Then I think the projection is not the case. So it depends how you look at the numbers and then you got to look a little bit closer than just accept it.
And don't forget that in Islamically controlled lands, the penalty for leaving Islam is death. So how many people are actually Muslim and stay Muslim because they want to stay Muslim, and how many of them are actually staying Muslim because they're in a land because where if they leave Islam, it's off with their head. So the true number, Ahmadiyya did something in 1984. It's called Dawa in the UK, and I remember it because I think everybody's come across Jehovah's Witnesses, and I think your sister is a Jehovah's Witness from what you say, Stops. So I did a bit of research, and in Dawa, and Ahmadiyya did a comparison to Jehovah's Witnesses in 1984 in a program called Dawa in the UK, and he even said then you cannot compete with these people, the Jehovah's Witnesses. If the whole Muslim world were to unite together with all the petrol dollars, and even he himself used the term, we're always looking for a scapegoat. We should be propagating this religion, yet this small sect are doing more than what we are. Now, the interesting thing with Jehovah's Witnesses is that they publish every year, every land that they're in, what the population of that land is, and the growth percentage ratio to that land. So whatever the figures are from any other religion, they actually show what the figures are. Whereas Muslims, it's just a nebulous statement. We are the well, is it Wahhabi? Is it Salafi? Is it Sunni? Is it Shia? How are you collating the figures? What is the method used? Who's collecting them? Which head office? I mean, with Jehovah's Witnesses, they actually have a head office, so you can see how it works, and they publish the figures and they break it down for anyone to read every year in their yearbook. But with Islam, I challenge them using those Jehovah's Witnesses and say, well, how are you doing it then in comparison to these people? They're smaller, they're self-financed, yet everybody knows who they are around the world. You lot are the fastest growing religion allegedly, yet you have no syllabus, you have no curriculum, you have no dawah where you're going door to door. No one knows anything really much of what you believe apart from what they hear in the media and the lies that you espouse when you're countering the argument. So what is it? How are you making this statement that you're the fastest growing religion in the world? I see no evidence of that other than, like you say, birth growth rate, and they marry women young. They're producing 4 or 5 children per family. And if a man can have 2 or 3 wives, he can have upwards of 15, 20 children. And if you're in a Muslim controlled land, how does a Muslim stop being a Muslim over there? Because I think one of the scholars many years ago, or it could have even been recently, said that if there wasn't the punishment of death for leaving Islam, Islam would have been bankrupt. So, sorry, carry on.
No, great. Please, come on. Okay, Quran can only be understood in Arabic. I mean, we're in the 21st century. We're not in the 7th century. We are very well equipped today to translate text, so we know how to do that. And we have so many different translations and so many people who actually have studied ancient or Quranic or whatever Arabic. There are people
but it's self-defeating as well, Stops, as we've pointed out. Because if there's English converts, they've read this book, and if it's an inaccurate translation, then they have converted without understanding the full book in its original language, and there could be errors, and therefore their conversion could be due to an error. And so they should deconvert, first understand Arabic, then read it in Arabic, get a clear understanding, then convert, then they would be consistent with that argument.
Yeah, that's one point. The other point is that if you only take it in Arabic, then why is it that the sentences, you are supposed to be kind to your parents, you're supposed to enjoy everybody, you really need to be good to everybody. Why is it that these sentences are being given to me in English, even if I do not understand Arabic? Those sentences, for some reason, can be understood in Arabic.
Thing is, I'd ask the question to a Muslim, but where all the languages come from in the first place? Because if you go from the biblical narrative, the previous revelation, it was the Tower of Babel where God confused people and gave them all languages. So he's responsible for languages as far as the biblical narrative is concerned. This is supposed to be the same God. But they don't say that. So I'll have to ask the question then, because those texts, the previous texts, will also say that, talking of Jehovah's Witnesses again, and I'll use them as an example, that they publish all around the world. So they're publishing their gospel in the native language of the land that they go to. They don't just take the American language or the English language or a French language. You go to, say, China or India and speak in speak in French or English. They speak in the Hindi language over there. So that would show, if you like, a consistency as far as the biblical narrative is concerned. Whereas with the Arab narrative, the Quranic narrative, where does Allah say you have to read this in Arabic to understand what I'm trying to say? Second of all, if it can't be translated in the sense of purity, my argument would be, when it says beat your wife, what am I missing out on in Arabic that I can't understand in English? When it says Dulkarnain traveled to a certain place and he saw two tribes and he built an iron wall, what are you getting from this in Arabic that I'm not getting in English? So where is the beauty or the missing message or the understanding or the comprehension that you're getting that I'm not getting? If it says do not kill somebody, in any language you can translate it. There's not a sort of a hidden meaning if you understand it in Arabic, not that I can work out.
But also the other thing to add to that is, if it's in Arabic, a vanishingly small amount of people, as Hassan has put in as well, understand classical Arabic, right? So is the message for all people for all time? In which case, you've given a language that 99% of the population on the planet do not understand. And the response I hear from some Muslims is, oh, well, you can learn it. Hang on a moment. If I'm sending a message, do I want to make the bar to understanding the message as difficult as possible or as easy as possible? Do I want people to understand my message as clearly and concisely as possible? And if so, is people... Most human beings do not understand Arabic, so it's a vanishingly small minority of people that do understand classical Arabic. Am I going to send it in that language and then insist that my creation understand a language that very few people do? Or if I'm sending a clear message, should it in fact be in a language that everybody could understand? Or, as I've always said, there's an obelisk. Replace the Kaaba with a magical obelisk. You go down there, you read it, and magically it appears to you in your own language, so crystal clear that every single person, whatever version of whatever language they understand, can speak to each other or somehow communicate and say, oh, I got exactly the same message. That would be quite remarkable, and it would stand the test of time. And you would have something that, you know, we would go down there and go, this is pretty unusual. Human beings can't easily do this. So, but what do we get instead? Something with a very small number of people that can hardly read it, and then the majority of Muslims are people who don't understand Arabic. So this is unhelpful to say that, you know, the Quran can only be understood in Arabic, in which case what you're really saying is that there's only a very, very small number of Muslims, true Muslims. The rest are Muslims who have accepted it without good reasons because they haven't read the, quote, true Quran.
But that shows it's not the fastest growing religion in the world, and it also shows that the figure of 1.6 billion, whatever it is not a true reflection and a false statement. Then the true number of Muslims must be only about 100 million at best. That means the other 1.5 billion are fake false Muslims. And it's in fact then a receding religion, not an increasing religion, because the number of people that are able to speak the fluent Arabic of the Quran and understand it are actually dying and not growing. That would be the logical conclusion I'd draw.
It's a very bad argument, very bad. As we pointed out, it leads to some very uncomfortable inferences that a Muslim will probably want to take back this, quote, critique.
Well, there's an additional problem because the words in the Quran, for example, are terribly vague and ambiguous. So you need to interpret them, each and every one of them. So if you take the word like what we had, I mean, we've had so many Muslims come here and say, well, alcohol is prohibited in the Quran. It's not. Number one, the word prohibit doesn't even appear there. The second thing is the word khamr, for example, today in Egypt is being taken as wine in today's standard Arabic that they use in Egypt. But in Morocco and Oman, it's not. So you have various differences where people say, well, I am a native Arab speaker, so I understand the Quran the way it is written. That's another bullshit stories. Because it's only, I think it was 30, so it's 0.0001% or 2% of the world's population actually speak the classical, the Quranic Arabic. And that's like negligible. So...
Well, according to the conversation that hijab had,
a good lawyer. I'm sorry, Thaddeus, I need to. A good lawyer should be able to get all the non-Arabic speaking unbelievers out of hell on a technicality. That's such a nice point. I need to remember that. Exactly. This is how you outmaneuver a god, eh? Oh, that's nice. Sorry, Thunder. I just thought this was great.
No, of course. I was just thinking that, well, then considering the conversation that hijab had with Yasser Qadi, then it depends which is the uncreated Quran in heaven in the first place, because you have to have the one that knows the truth, that understands the one that's in heaven. So the Quran on earth has to match the one in heaven. So when you look at
Exactly.
all the Arabic Qurans, then out of the 200 million that are probably, or 100 million that are professing to be true Muslims, well, of the 31 or 37 as it is now Arabic Qurans that we have, you'll have to dwindle it down yet again, because you can only be a true Muslim if you follow in the Quran that's in heaven. So who are those that are following the true Quran that's on earth that's also representative of the one that's in heaven? So that would put it down to what? 20 million? Boy, the numbers are getting smaller the more we progress with this.
I think that the moral of the story, this is a terrible, terrible argument to say that you must
Yes.
understand in Arabic. It's self-defeating to virtually everything else that's going to come out of your mouth. So Muslims, please don't use this. It's terrible.
Terrorists can't be Muslim because they kill Muslims. Oh my goodness. But this is, I don't understand, but I've heard this. I've really heard this. I've heard people say this to me. And then I think to myself, well, why is it that a Sunni, for example, will accuse a Shia or a Sufi or an Ahmadiyya or somebody of being a non-Muslim so that they can go and kill them? So you are first being called a heretic, then you're being called a non-Muslim, then you're called an apostate, and then you're killed. And then you're saying because they kill Muslims. Well, do they really kill Muslims? No, they don't, because a Muslim will justify for himself that he is not killing a Muslim. He is killing somebody else, and he's not killing him because Allah is taking the blame, because Allah is doing it for you. So you are not doing the real killing, it's the God that does it for you, and he will take the blame. So this is so wrong on so many levels, it's amazing.
Yeah,
Any other
agreed.
opinions?
And of course, we
Suicide
see it
bombings.
all the time. Yeah, and we see it all the time among the different sects as well. So, but like you say, then the one sect will say the other aren't true Muslims. So that's an
And they
unfortunate.
don't have this intellectual thing. There is no, I mean, I don't understand this. Now, if you go back 800 years, you had this super great invention. You had Kalam. You had the, like, come on, what happened to Al-Ghazali, to Ibn Rushd, to all those people? They were really great philosophers. They knew how to create arguments. They knew that they were intellectually sound arguments that you could provide, that you could, that you could fight in an intellectual manner. You didn't have to go into violence. So what happened? What happened to those people? Why is it that today, if I go and find a Muslim and I say to him, listen, is it really necessary to do that? The first response I will get, I'm going to hit you. I'm going to flatten you. I'm going to fight you. Why is it that they immediately jump to violence? I don't understand that.
Well, who are they reflecting?
Well, this is the point. I mean, Muhammad also, in the history of Muhammad, the way that is said, he also knew how to argue with people, how to bring his point across. There are also instances where he was not violent, where he also said, listen, guys, how about doing this and this? And it worked. So there are instances, there are examples in the history, in the standard narration even, which show that you can go without. And I agree, yes, at the end of the day, I agree with you. It boiled down to violence. But there are indications that it could be done without. So it's quite strange.
It could be done without people who were going to believe him, but then his audience were Jews and Christians, and they knew not to believe him.
No. I'm just thinking clearly. I said the classical Arabic was a dead language. Well, it is. It doesn't, the only reason to learn classical Arabic today is to read the Quran or maybe some hadith even. But other than that, there is no reason because the language does not develop. You will not find the word for mobile phone or even the word for bicycle in the Quran because it does not develop. It's a dead language. That's the definition. If it doesn't develop any further, then that's it. And the Quran is not written in the modern standard Arabic, but in classical Arabic. So by definition, a dead language. So yeah. Suicide bombings are against Islam. Oh boy, no, they're not. You can argue that to take your own life is then measuring yourself with God, who is supposed to giver and taker, to be the giver and taker of life. Correct. But that's all. If you are a martyr, this is highly appreciated. You are given the fast track. You don't have to go and stand in the long queue. You go and stand in the short queue, and you can then go and speak for your family and ask for special favors for a martyr. So this is like double-edged somehow. Other opinions?
No, agreed.
It's a phobia. More people are killed by bathtubs than
Yeah, I think
and
we
they
talked
could
about
be
this,
right. Oh goodness! The only thing is, okay, Rob, you take this one.
Yeah, the whole thing with a phobia. What is a phobia? So what is it that people are phobic about? Because that's an irrational fear. And the only thing I've never heard somebody saying Islamophobia, because obviously that's even worse than Islamophobia. But if you're claiming that it's Islamophobia, well, that's a made-up word, and it's obviously not. What you could argue, and here's again, I think, like a knockdown argument against this claim. You could have something that would be Jainophobia, right? That's an irrational fear of a religion that is passively peaceful in the extreme. So to fear a passive non-violence, you would be irrational. But to fear some form of violence would not make you irrational. And so pointing out that more people are killed by something else it's just a non sequitur. One doesn't follow from the other.
And does it make terrorists okay if they kill less people than bathtubs?
Yeah, or doesn't mean that you have to have more deaths in order to critique it. No, obviously not.
You
can only learn Islam from a Muslim. Oh dear.
Well, which one? Is it the one? Any one of the 1.6 billion? Is it the ones that read Arabic? Is it the one that reads the Quran that's in heaven? I mean, which ones are we talking to? Are you talking about? And could you identify those? So, first of all, is it any Muslim? Clearly not. Then then you find it down to Arabic-speaking Muslims. Okay, we've got that down to about 200 million. And then we also have the one that, to get the true Islam, we have to have one that's given us Islam from the Quran that's in heaven. So you got down to about 20 million. So of all the Muslims you know, which one of those Muslims are the ones that have got the same Quran as in heaven? You don't even know which Quran it is that's in heaven either. It could be anyone. So it's a flipping lottery.
And then you have the Hanbalis, the Shafis, and so on. Then you have the Salafis and all the other different groupings. Come on, it's different. You can't. And this is the worst thing, to learn Islam from a Muslim, because you only get one single viewpoint of one single person, one single interpretation of what one individual person takes from being Islam, because we know already there is no such thing as one Islam. There is no such thing as one type of Muslim. It's and I have to bring up this example again. If you look at the Matterhorn, the one guy standing on the left side will say it's a vertical wall of 2 kilometer height, and the other one will say, on the opposite side, will say no, it's a gentle incline all the way to the top. The one says it's vertical on the right and sloped on the left. The other one says the opposite. So it depends where you stand, how you describe the mountain, and the same is true for Islam. So sorry, no.
Yeah, exactly. Which Muslim is it, right? I think that's the main point here.
Yeah.
And how do they demonstrate that they are the correct one? Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. Because at the end of the day, this is always my favorite sentence. There's only two Muslims. It's the one Muslim and Muhammad. Those are the only two real Muslims who are then really left. 17, under Sharia, your loans are interest-free. What bollocks.
That's you've just... Sorry, go on.
No, go for it, then.
I was just going to say that, yeah, you say it's interest-free, but you probably make a charge. Nobody lends money for free. If you're lending money, you're charging for that money. The only person you wouldn't do that to is a friend or family.
Well, the thing is, they just don't call it interest; they call it fee.
Yeah, they call it usually anything. It's a euphemism, basically. Instead of a fixed interest rate, it's just a charge.
And there's a huge disadvantage, and this is something that Abdullah Samir pointed out. If you, for example, you go to a bank and you say, I want to buy a house, I have 50%, can you loan me the 50%? And they will tell you yes. And it's true that you don't pay interest. The problem is that the bank buys the house for you, and then you pay back the bank the amount of the house plus, of course, the fee. So that's interest. But the point is, you don't own the house. So you cannot go and put it up as a collateral because you are not the owner. If you miss a couple of payments, you lose the entire house. So this is a much worse situation than you have. And here, I mean, it's very rare that I do this. I have to actually go now and praise the Anglo-American capitalist system, which normally I loathe because I find the Islamic system much better because it's based on a product and not under, this whole speculation, and all this falls away. So here, I think it's actually better. Thunder, did you manage to get your list?
He's got it there in the private chat there, Stops.
In
the private chat there. So, Thunder, do you want to go through the ones that we didn't include here, and then we can just critique each one of those as you go through ones that don't match what Stops has put up.
Okay, what I can do, there are some missing because it's too short. Because then what I'll do is I'll just plonk them down here, and you can just go through them one by one. Because I can't see which is what.
Okay. So I've got a list. The way that it's done it, I don't know why it went like that into some kind of like paragraph. I've actually compiled a list on my iPad. So in between moving my file from one location to another, it's kind of corrupted it slightly. So
hang on, let me delete this and do it like this.
It's supposed to be a list.
I think we can just read it, Stops, and then just hit enter every single time we get to an end of a sentence or something.
All right, can you read this?
Yeah, the Quran you quote is a poor translation, which is kind of what we said, right? That's one's already been done.
All right, Thunder, go.
Okay, so let me start again. Then the Quran you quote is pure translation. The Quran you quote is only 5% accurate, and I put in brackets 95% is accurate, therefore false. The hadith you used is false. The hadith you used is weak. The hadith you've used is taken out of context. Have you learnt Arabic? Islam can only be understood in Arabic. Do you read Arabic? Do you read classical Arabic? The Quran was revealed in classical Arabic. The surah of the Quran you have quoted is taken out of context. You hate Islam. You're a Islamophobe. You've been brainwashed. You're a Zionist. You're a right-wing fascist. You're Illuminati. You were never a real Muslim. You did not allow Islam to enter your heart. You learned Islam from the wrong scholars. You did not offer Salah 5 times a day. You get your Islam from Google, or Prophet Google as it should be called now. You are Western foreign policy supporter. You mistranslated the ayah. You misinterpreted the ayah. You misunderstood the ayah. You did not understand You do not understand rhetorical devices. You have not studied Arabic etymology. Each root word can have 10 different meanings. There you go. That's my list of retorts that I've heard thus far.
Okay, can you? I mean, just go through a couple and comment on them. What you think about them today?
Yeah, many of them are non sequiturs, as I was saying there. They got nothing to do with Islam, the critique of Islam itself, right?
Oh.
The fact that you might be right wing, left wing, middle, down wing, up wing, no wings, whatever the case may be, is irrelevant to the critique, right? So there's just so many non sequiturs in there.
You do not understand rhetorical devices. So that was one I thought, we might.
Neither does every other Muslim, apparently. because they all
No.
disagree with each other.
Yeah, that was exactly the thing, isn't it? You know, and then which Quran are they using as well now? Which Quran are we using when we're trying to use rhetorical devices? Because that one has I forget what they are in Arabic. I know in Urdu it's the diacritic remark dots so you can pronounce the vowels. So which Quran are you going to be using? Because some Qurans have different words in that area or in the ayah. So it's not going to match the one in heaven, is it? Then we have was it Muhammad or whatever his name is? He comes on in Maverick. That's it. You've not understood Arabic etymology. Each root word can have 10 meanings. Well, if that's the logic, then each ayah can have probably about 100 variations as to what it's trying to say, which means that each chapter in the Quran you can have 10,000 versions of one chapter, which means there's probably about 100 million versions of the Quran you can have out of one root word having 10 different meanings.
That makes the whole Quran using classical Arabic pretty useless.
Just gives us a clear understanding, right, that every human with a reasonable level of intelligence can understand. Why is that so difficult?
Because it doesn't
Either he
happen
can't or he won't.
Because it doesn't happen in any other piece of literature. It doesn't happen in any other language. So you have to ask the question, why is it happening in this language? Why is it happening in this religion?
These are questions you will never get answers to.
Because most other religions don't claim that it was divinely dictated. Others claim it's divinely inspired or some other words of that effect. So there's a message there, but they're not claiming it's word for word, or that it 100% accurately represents reality, whereas they are claiming this, right? And if they are claiming this, and we see that it doesn't, what do you do about this? And is this the best you can do?
Yeah, but the thing is, you take any language, let's take any of the previous scriptures then, whether it's from Hinduism right down to Judaism and Christianity and Greek. You don't find them arguing about what words mean and how to translate the words. You can pretty much translate. Those books have been translated in multiple languages. In fact, the Bible's been translated in hundreds. You don't find the argument. You might find out the argument of understanding the culture because we're so far removed from that period of time when many people probably were farmers or worked a lot with their hands. Now that's not the case. We're living in a totally different world from their world. So you might have to explain certain cultural things like farming or agriculture or pasturage or something like that. But you're not having to understand. You're not having to help people understand what words mean. Whereas with Arabic, it's not about those things. It's not about the lifestyle that they had, because it seems that the only lifestyle they had was war, conquest, raiding people's for their property, spoils of war, slavery, kidnapping women and forcing them to be married, child rape, and the Arabic language. Other than that, there's not really much in the Quran than the threat of violence. So what is there to understand?
The thing is, what you need to understand, though, if you disregard the contents of the Quran, you are told that you are going to suffer for eternity. But then, how are you supposed to understand the Quran? I mean, we've had we're on chapter number 6. How many sentences have we come across that we had no idea what they're supposed to say? And I'm not even talking about the letter sentences, the 29 thingamajigs where the chapter starts with ALM or with HM or something like that. I mean, this is the funny thing. Muslims believe that there is a God based on what it says in the Quran. But they don't even understand the Quran, because at least when it comes to HMALM, these things they don't understand. So how can you follow a book you don't understand, where you need to pick and choose? Well, this I understand, this I don't understand. Well, this I'm going to leave out, but oh yeah, this looks important. You, at the end of the day, are creating your own religion. So how is that going to impress anybody else? You need to go and do that. People tell me all the time, well, the morality I get is from the Quran because this is from God. And then I say, well, does the Quran say anything about not eating human flesh? No, it doesn't. Do you eat human flesh? No, of course not. So where do you get this from? If not from from society, it's relative. And this is the point, that you cannot say that everything there is in this world needs to originate in the Quran. It can't. How many sentences make absolutely no sense? How do you now come to the correct understanding? How do you know at the end of the day that this is what this God actually meant and what is intended by the sentence if you interpret this? So the whole thing doesn't make sense. It falls apart.
I think to back up what Stops is saying there as well, this isn't just the conclusion of the panel of the show that nobody can make heads or tails and the confusion and the repeated tedium of the Quran. This is what all non-Muslims are saying that have studied the Quran as well. This is their conclusion that they draw to, and it's quite a unifying, repeated pattern. That anybody who's a non-Muslim that reads the Quran, they find it repetitive, they find it a jumbo, they find it a mess, they find it incoherent, they find no message in there that benefits mankind or hasn't been repeated or plagiarized from something that's been said previously. So what is the benefit of this book? And now, and I encourage anybody that's watching the show to listen to the latest discussion between Muhammad Hijab and Yasser Qadhi. Some real honest talk there, particularly on Yasser Qadhi's part.
Okay, the question that I have now is why, if there's a God, this God has written the Quran on some tablets in heaven, or it's always existed. There are differing opinions on this. Why is it that you need apologists? Why is it that you need people, human beings like you and me, who have to tell you what it says in the Quran if a God is unable to do so? Why does it need humans to tell me that? If a God can't?
Just go back to the understanding of the Quran. When the Quran and Islam understand that the Quran is the the uncreated speech of Allah. That's Yasser Qadhi's way of describing the Quran. The uncreated speech of Allah. Is that not an oxymoron or a contradiction in there somewhere? Uncreated speech, it's a bit like Dark Light or Final Fantasy VII.
No.
How can speech of Allah be uncreated?
No, it goes back to he does not beget and is not begotten. The same thing is with the Quran. And this is one opinion of maybe, I don't know, 50 million or something, who think that the Quran came into being the same way as Allah did, and that is, it has always existed.
But how can it be a speech then? Speech is something you do. It comes out your mouth. There is a thought process. And through that thought process, there is an action that follows where you decide to have those words come out your mouth. That's an action. So it's a thought process.
Figurative. It's not literal.
How can it be described as speech then, if it's and be uncreated at the same time?
Well, it's figurative, and you know that in the Quran there are sentences which are literal and some which are, just metaphorical, and this is one of those.
Okay. Yeah, you're doing Yasser Qadhi now. You're doing a Yasser Qadhi.
Oh my God, this is so funny. Now, it's a pity that there was no Muslim apologist here to tell us how to do these things.
Maybe they can join us on Discord. I think they're a bit nervous about coming on here. And I posted on Twitter that Imran, I think you were tagged in it. Imran, somebody said, Imran, you can come and talk on the gin and tonic. I said, hey, if he's nervous, he can always bring a friend. But I think people are a little bit nervous to come on. So you or I need to go onto Muslim panels because most Muslims are a little bit cautious, if I'm going to be incredibly charitable about coming on here. And those that do come on here aren't even aware of how poorly their arguments are. So there's a level of a complete lacking of introspection, or being able to recognize when you're saying something rather silly. You wanted to say something? What did
Yeah,
you
because
forget?
this reminds me, because I'm going to spend a little bit of time looking at this SC Speakers Corner Dawa channel, and you just reminded me of something that I forgot in my script, because I'm scripting this, okay? Because there's so many things in there that I cannot do this from the top of my head. I forgot that there were only 4 Muslims, and this was why it was so relatively easy. I forgot to mention this, so I quickly had to write this down before I forget this. All right. Can anybody tell me a positive argument that they have heard from an apologist which has actually made them think? Now we've seen so many examples now of arguments where you immediately know how to kick them in the face, and they will just disappear. So there's lots and lots and lots of those. So I've never been like okay, except for last week, I must admit. But then I was pumped full of stuff, so I was a bit lethargic. I realized that now when I listened to myself a week ago. So there are some things where I don't click immediately. But other than that, I've never heard any argument where if I thought about it for a couple of seconds that I couldn't immediately refute.
I've not heard of anything specific myself. I don't know about thunderers.
Hang on, why is stops lacking a definition?
Oh, your definition of atheism. He's still
Because
going on about
exist.
that. I mean,
how do you define something that doesn't exist? Okay, I've done it. Exactly. I've done this. I've explained this. I don't know what he doesn't understand. But then, because I was just thinking, yeah, but he seems to be a Muslim. So how come he can take pot shots at a person, the personal attack, instead of looking at the arguments? Why doesn't he address apologetics? Why doesn't he come up with an argument why we should believe what the Quran says, or what in the Quran should we believe? That is crystal clear. Why doesn't he do that?
well, because
Why do people like this go and try and attack the person instead of the argument?
Well, I think because there isn't a substantial argument in favor of that. So rather than that, I mean, he sometimes goes on a bit about objective morality, and I've tried to educate him on that, but I think it's in one ear and out the other. So I don't know whether he doesn't understand, isn't listening, or a combination of both.
It's the Islam virus
anyway.
at work, yeah. It clouds the mind, it numbs critical thinking capabilities. Wow, and this is, people seem to be in a bubble, and
but anybody could join us, right?
Through.
Let's just see if we can re-add the
who
link
can't
for the
even
show.
Define his own identity. I can define my own identity, but this is exactly. Listen, you need to switch on your brain. I don't know if you have 2 brain cells which are capable of operation like simultaneously. If you allow them to work at the same time, both of them, maybe you will understand this. I said, I do not define as something that I am not. So I do not define myself. Hello, I am stops. I do not collect stamps. Hello, I am stops. I do not believe dragons exist. I don't do that. Maybe you do, but then you're incredibly dumb. I'm not. So either you have something to go for, or you have an argument that is convincing, because at the moment there is no good reason to believe gods exist, and so I don't. And if you can't bring anything, then it is you who has failed. Because
let's talk about it more on Discord if they want to come on.
16:125, who should come here and give us good arguments for why we should believe. If you don't do that, you fail.
I've put the Discord link in again, so if anybody wants to join us after the show, they can do that. But I think they just don't have good arguments. I don't think I believe with a high probability, given my exposure to it, that they just don't have good arguments. So therefore, if you don't have a good argument, you've got to find some other way to avoid having to give an argument or to critique somebody else. Right?
Yeah. And Krishna is making, thank you, it's a very good point to bring up this faith thing. And this is why, can you tell me anything that you would decide on faith? Do you buy roller skates based on faith, or do you first check if they all have wheels and if they're all turning, or do you just say, well, I'll just buy anything blind? If I give you a closed box and tell you there's a dragon in there, do you believe this on faith, or will you say to me, well, at least let me take a peek to see if it's really in there? It's that easy. Okay, is
Yeah,
there
they bring
anything
up a
else
terrible
that we can
argument.
add for today?
Not that I know. I think we've gone through quite a few of the terrible rebuttals and explained why those are terrible rebuttals. Both yourself and Thunderous have brought those up, and I think we've explained what the problems with virtually every one of them are. So none of those quote-unquote excuses or comments or whatever the case may be are substantial or credible. So stop using those, Muslims. I don't know what else you can use, to be honest. You could just stop making bad arguments, which would mean you wouldn't be a Muslim anymore. And Thunderous is a good example of that. So follow his example. There we go.
All right, guys. Then, if there's nothing else that we can help you with, if there's nothing else that we can say, I have faith my wife isn't cheating on me. Okay. Well, don't you think that you have good indications to have this belief? Now, remember, faith, all right, there's different definitions. My definition that I use is faith is a belief that is neither verifiable nor falsifiable. So you can't do either one of those. So this is why you believe it, but you have no reason to do so. Now, if I think about my wife, I don't have faith that she is not cheating on me. I have reasons to believe that she is not. So this is the difference that I see there.
Yeah, there's good reasons for that. So that's a terrible analogy.
So that's why I wouldn't use it.
I don't know if Thunderous wants to
Okay,
add
then let's
anything
go
else.
to the hadith.
Otherwise, yeah,
No, I'm fine.
cool. Yeah, let's do the hadith and call it an evening.
Bukhari 4:54, 433. Narrated our good old friend Abu Huraira. The Prophet said, on every Friday, the angels take their stand at every gate of the mosques to write the names. To write the names of the people chronologically as they enter according to the time of their arrival for the Friday prayer. And when the Imam then sits on the pulpit, they fold up their scrolls and get ready to listen to the sermon. And that is the end of the hadith.
What benefit is the sermon to an angel? What benefit is the sermon to an angel? I mean, a sermon will relate to fleshly creatures here in the physical realm, in the universe on earth. The angels are supposed to live in the spirit dimension in Allah's brothel. So how do they benefit from listening? And if angels don't have the capacity of free will, then the benefit is even less if there was any in the first place.
Yeah, but you see, this is the problem. You're being logical.
Sorry.
Yeah. This is a big mistake. Doesn't work. All right, guys. Thank you very much. Thank you for being here. Thank you to the chat. Thank you to the people making comments, even if some are not so useful. But it's always good to know that there are people, that people are interested. And if you did enjoy something that we did, give us a thumbs up. And if there is anything that you want to, and again, I forgot to go and check last week's show, which I wanted to do, because I was just going to say, and if you want to leave any comments and make suggestions what we should tackle in the month of July, because remember, we need to find a theme for July. And if you don't want us to go and dictate this, you have the opportunity and possibility to tell us what you would like as theme of the month, where we will spend a lot of time looking at it from different perspectives and different angles to see that we get as much as possible as an objective discussion here. So,
Sorry, just if you're struggling and there is nothing else to think of, what about racism in Islam?
That's a
think
very
we've done that,
short
haven't we?
one, isn't it?
Sorry, I don't think we've
We've
done
done that,
racism.
haven't we?
We've done slavery,
Yeah,
but not racism.
we have done racism, but not as a theme, as a just as a general concept. And I think it's a very short one because you point out a couple of hadith. There's nothing in the Quran about different races that you should prefer one over the other. It's mainly the hadith, but there's nothing that I know of that I'm aware of in the Quran that would, go into the racism.
Well, I could probably mention something from my own childhood about how black people were used and despised.
Yeah, but then
Let's chat
that's
about it, shall
personal
we?
testimony.
Most of the
Chat about
testimony
it, shall we,
anybody
afterwards?
to themselves, but we could discuss that in just Discord. Yeah,
But Thunderous, this would be a good idea. If you want to have, I mean, this can even be just a 10-minute thing. That you will just say, look, here is the way that it's implemented, even though it is not a distinctive, let's call it idea in the Quran. At the end of the day, it is still being implemented, and there are several indications in the literature which indicate racism, and there is inherent racism in Islam, that you can then spend 10 minutes just relating to that. That is something that you can always do.
I think it's something topical considering the attitude of the world at the moment in certain countries as far as racism is concerned. I could do that next week for 10 minutes.
Would you do that?
Yeah, we'll do it next week.
Can I pencil this in?
Absolutely.
Okay, great
I'll
stuff.
just
Yeah.
talk about 10 minutes of anecdotal experiences.
So you've committed?
I'm committed.
Super. Thank you for that. Then I'll make a note of this, that we're going to have Thunder on racism and how you want to attack this, what kind of perspective you want to give it is up to you. Okay, super. There is a constant need to, what is this? To say Islam is not a religion of peace and constant hearing. Actually, that's a good point. We didn't have this today. Because this is a lot of apologetics as well, which says, yeah, Islam is a religion of peace, and we see left, right, and center that it is not. It doesn't say anything about peace. Islam, even though the root, Salam, is the same, peace is salam. This is peace be with you, salam alaikum. And it's not Islam alaikum. Islam is the submission. And it has nothing to do with peace. And the thing is, at the end of the day, the claim is that if everybody is a Muslim, then we're going to have peace. But we can see that that doesn't work, because as soon as you have Islam, you have different factions which fight each other, and then you have total turmoil. So it's the opposite. But it's a good point. We forgot about this. Thank you. That's it. Then we'll see you next week. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. See you on Friday, 8 p.m. Don't forget the thumbs up, and we'll see you next Friday. Bye.
Good night,
everybody.